All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls of all ages, welcome back to another episode of The Macro Perspective. And we're here yet again in our Cenegenics guest series with our boss. If we're being honest, no, Rudy, VP of Performance Health here at Cenegenics, and we're super grateful that he's going to give us, about an hour to 90 minutes of his time, kind of discussing multiple topics on longevity and age management medicine, in which we have been a part. Or Seamus and I have been so. I think if we add up our years together, we're still less than you, Rudy.
Probably. It's okay though. It's okay.
So with that, he's been in this space for how many years is it now for you?
I've been with Cenegenics for 15 years. Been in the studying the material for, like 22, 23 years now.
Oh wow. Okay. So there you have it. So to say, decade and a half of information, and maybe we can talk about how the landscape has changed in the 15 years, what hasn't changed, and things of that nature. But again, VP of Performance Health, and I'd really let you do a little introduction of yourself as to like what got you here, why you like what you do, and a little bit about you with methodologies and whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in like my influential years in youth were like in the 90s, right? So like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies and that kind of whole like masculine, like muscular vibe. So that was like always my like dream kind of perspective. Like I want to grow up and be like that. And I was always a big kid growing up. I'm half Japanese, but I got my German side's like physical attributes. And I was always like the big kid in sports. Like I played center in basketball. I played, threw shot put. Played lineman in football. And I really kind of got tired of being like the big guy, like in like the not best way. So I really started dabbling in nutrition for myself when I was 17, and I actually cut 80 pounds within a school year by the dietary changes that I implemented. And that's without any coaching. That's just through my own independent research, trial and error, my own accountability, and ended up cutting, 80 pounds by the time I graduated. My lifts obviously all went to shit, but, I was way healthier and looked great. And that kind of continued on with me as I went to undergrad. And when I was in undergrad, then I actually started training with a competitive bodybuilder at the time who was sponsored by one of the companies that made a really hot supplement at the time. And I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. And from there, I really got into training into bodybuilding and actually changed my undergraduate major from health physics into exercise science with cardiac rehab, and dove into the studies, dove into the lifestyle. And then I actually was getting ready to go to my shift as a bouncer in college and undergrad. So I was a bouncer, personal trainer, and I worked at a tanning salon. So I was like the ultimate meathead from the East Coast. And
GTL.
yeah, GTL every day.
There it
So
is.
I was eating dinner, getting ready to go to go bounce, and there was a 60 Minutes episode around longevity, and it highlighted primarily Cenegenics as this oasis in the desert of Las Vegas. And our co-founder pulls up in a Rolls Royce, and there's palm trees and a White House looking building, and he's lifting weights at Gold's Flamingo and Sand Hill, pumping out multiple plates on a hammer strength. This guy's like in his 60s. He's eating clean, and he's just he had so much vitality and energy, and I'm like blown away. And because they were talking about all the science and data from nutrition, exercise, nutraceuticals, hormone optimization, testosterone, all these things. And I'm this like impressionable 22-year-old. I'm watching this. I'm like, this place is amazing. And it stuck with me. The funny thing is, it didn't really stick with me enough, I guess, at the time, because fast forward like a year, I ended up moving out to, Las Vegas for graduate school in clinical ex-phys. And I'm driving to Las Vegas Athletic Club where I had my part-time job, and I see a billboard for Cenegenics. And I was like, that's the place I watched on TV like a year ago. And I actually immediately called up to see if I could get a site tour, not as a patient, but just to really see the place because I was really blown away by it. And met with the team at the time and did the tour and submitted my resume, let them know I still had a couple years of school left, and followed up maybe every 3 to 6 months. And one of those follow-ups led to a response that was asking me to come in for an interview. and came in to interview for a clinical role in the Las Vegas office and was offered the job. And, the rest is history, I guess.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Like being impressed by like a 60-minute, man, those things must have been fun. And then you were still going to school at this time, so you still have to like get in your reps, do everything. I mean, doing 2 to 3 jobs and then doing school must have been tough. Can you kind of take us through that, like what it means to go through like a master's in clinical exphys, all that data sets, and like what it means, kind of like now? Like I would say that's a bit maybe outdated or just kind of added upon now.
With it was a challenge. Like, I honestly, I think I probably would have been better as a non-traditional student. Like, if I entered the workforce and then came back as a full-time student or part-time student, I probably would have appreciated it more. Now, I appreciate it now, but during the process, it was just a lot. And, you moved to Las Vegas, and when I moved here from the East Coast, it was the first time I've ever been out here. So there's all these things that you want to go do. The valley is so like broad that it's hard to get places. Like, I live like 35 minutes away from campus, and it's hot. Like, you're walking and parking at UNLV student parking lot, and you're walking across campus in like 115-degree heat for the first time. Like, this wasn't the most fun experience. But looking back at it now, the opportunities we had in the exercise physiology lab with like Dr. Larry Golding, who's done a lot of really cool things for multiple academic organizations and studies around VO2 and body composition measurement, and strategies in exercise and biomechanics. It's been that was a really cool opportunity that I was fortunate to have. And the other thing is, like, if I rolled the dice and went as a non-traditional student, didn't go to school right away, it's tough to get back into it. So while I felt a little like I felt like I was dragging on school even farther, which I wasn't necessarily like excited about, it definitely paid off in the long run, because I was able to get that done, and that gave me some leverage as I entered the workforce.
Yeah, you make me really think about the fact that I didn't go for a master's degree, but I was so sick of school, man. Like, I was so sick of it.
I get it. I get
Yeah.
it.
I'm like, gosh, like you saying that, it literally is like, I don't, I want to, but it's just so hard because then life kind of sneaks up on you and you're like, oh yeah, now I have 2 kids and when am I going to find the time to study? I have a hard enough time studying for this like certification exam within 3 weeks. So,
Yeah.
it's like just the rhythm and the study habits and all those things. It probably made more sense to have that kind of, I guess, traditional quote unquote outline path like that, where you just stay in school in perpetuity and then try to figure stuff out when you're 30. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, and people do it successfully. Like, my wife, she went for her master's degree at UNLV as well, like right after grad school, right after undergrad. And she just started her PhD maybe like in a year and a half ago. Not quite 2 years yet, but she's going to be finishing up probably within the next year. But it's a lot. I mean, between, as you become a professional and, you're following school and you have kids, and, your kids play ice hockey, which is demanding, and all these other things, it's definitely a challenge. But there's a term that the Japanese term, it's called ikigai. And it's when you look to find things around your passion, your mission, your vocation, and also your profession. When all those four elements blend, it's your like reason to live, essentially. So her finding her passion with her PhD and her studies there and all those other things she's involved with, it's manageable because it's the things that she truly wants to do. And the same goes for me, where while my profession is expanded from the clinical side to the business development side to operation side, working with you guys, it's like I honestly don't have hobbies because all of my hobbies are related to my profession. So I can manage that because, like, when I lift weights or when I'm looking at nutraceuticals to purchase or when I'm reading studies about different, hormone optimization, these are all things related to my day, like every single day. So it sounds like generic, but like it doesn't feel like work, even as demanding as it is, because it truly is something that I'm fortunate to really love what I do.
I love that. I said that about myself with some friends. Are like, Seamus, like, why is it you're constantly just about this stuff? I'm like, it's what I love. It's what I do for work. I do it for fun. It's what I like to research. So it just constantly feels like I'm in a constant flow. And yeah, you're right. Like, the work just doesn't feel like work at all. Obviously, there's the things you have to do, and there's the things you got to execute on from a business perspective. But like, there's always going to be new research. There's always going to be new things, and it's just always exciting. And I feel like that passion is always there. Um, but with that being said, yeah, let's talk about kind of where you're at now, Rudy. Kind of in that setting. First, from that clinical to the business point, I think we could kind of look at an arc of what Cenegenics is doing nowadays. But from the clinical side of things, what are you doing now in that clinical side of things to help push the narrative forward with our patients in longevity? What are the things that you're kind of excited for? I know you kind of alluded to like VO2 max. People talk about that. Maybe is there something else that you might be looking forward to other than just that VO2 max, which is obviously very important, but are there areas that you find more interesting at the moment?
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily more interesting, but seeing that there's more adoption and more success in application from the data that can be collected. Like, for example, we've done VO2 max testing at Cenegenics really since our inception 27 years ago. And it really went under the radar in like outside of clinical exercise physiology and performance labs. You know, doctors today talk about VO2 max in every single book that's written. They talk about DEXA scans in every single book that's written. They talk about all the different labs, you know, from cardiometabolic risk factors, vitamin D status, micronutrients, all these things. And it's exciting because these are things that we have embedded into our foundation as how we manage our patients. So not only were we first to market with all of these opportunities and this data collection for patients to drive better clinical health care, but really we've seen so much nuance and have so much experience in collecting that data, that just that alone, that more and more people are excited about getting that data. Like, I talked to our coach in another center this morning, and he had a 72-year-old patient come in, and he was so excited to do a DEXA, and he was asking about his max heart rate and where that stands up, and what his wattage was on the bike, and what his VO2 was, and where he crossed over into his anaerobic threshold. You know, many like, that's not an experience that many people had 15 years ago. So to be able to see that coming in now, it's really exciting.
Yeah.
And to build off of that, you know, it's getting the deeper dives into the labs that are more like when like the transition from certain specialty data points, things like apolipoprotein B or lipoprotein A, how that was a very specialty thing that was not collected, to now within our setting of Cenegenics, that's a standard lab that we're pulling. You know, I think that's what I'm excited about as we see these specialty labs, things like looking at certain genomics to identify how we can optimize our individual needs analysis even further. Things like how we can manage carbohydrates, not just from our insulin and glucose sensitivity, but more so around, is that going to drive oxidative stress, you know, when we consume carbohydrates? Do we have an issue possibly with how we translocate our receptors within our cells to pick up that glucose, and then in turn start to actually drive more inflammatory outcomes? For me, with my genomics, things like when I eat a saturated fat, my fat cells actually have a more inflammatory response to that based on my genomic profile. So looking at all this data, it's really cool that, in my opinion, like, the labs are becoming more accessible, because the functional metrics, things like the DEXA, the VO2, the ultrasounds, even going beyond that to like a CCTA scan, the brain EEG, those are all fantastic and exciting. But then when we layer that into different things with genomics or micronutrients or food allergy and food sensitivity responses, stool sample testing, as not as much fun as it is, right? All that stuff being more accessible to people, and then to have the tools and resources available to now create strategies and tactics for that N of one to really maximize health is really exciting. And technology is moving faster than it has ever been, you know, throughout our history. So things that were, you know, $10,000 tests 2 years ago are now getting into more reasonable prices. And as we, you know, progress even further, it's probably going to be a lot more affordable, not just for our patient base and our concierge practice, but it's also going to eventually get to the general population once the production goes to scale.
Wow.
Yeah. Is it safe to say that biomarkers are kind of becoming like plasma TVs were however many years ago that was, right? Like the cost of it is, I mean, it's kind of like a Tesla, I guess, would be the most like current example of it. Granted, I bought one like 3 years ago, and immediately it became instantaneously not valuable at all. Like it like depreciated even more rapidly because it's like a piece of tech, right? Versus that, and it's like, yeah, I could buy a brand new one for like 50% of what the, what it was 3 years ago. It's insane. Do you feel like biomarkers have kind of had a similar kind of thing to that because of it's more like an advancement in technology and the availability?
The
I think,
affordability.
yeah, I think from an accessibility perspective and an affordability perspective, I do believe that's the trend that we're observing. However, I feel like where it's different is in the value, not just in the perceived value, but actually in the clinical value, because those
Mm-hmm.
data points are still relevant. Like if you buy a plasma TV and then like, an LCD comes out, whatever version you want to look at, you're like, that loses its value because like the new hot things available.
Mm-hmm.
But, the data is still the data and the data is still important. So I think maybe if there's any degradation in value, it's because now they have more access than just maybe 10 lab values. They now have, 1,000 that they can
Yeah.
reach out.
Yeah.
Now that comes with its own challenges because as a society or as an audience in the health span and longevity space, it is very difficult to be steadfast in your goals and your main driver for the clinical outcome you're looking for, because there's a ton of levers. Like if we look in front of like a circuit board or we're driving a submarine or whatever you want to like frame it as, there's all these different buttons that are important for how we are operating and how we're going to get from point A to point B. But in this industry, from a consumer perspective, all these other companies, and they're great too. I mean, they do great things, but they're focused on one little button, and that just drives the person's entire focus on that button, and they miss the forest for the trees, because now they're just thinking about one little lever that they can try and pull, and that's going to help them get to their end zone. And it's not necessarily the case. Every single piece that can have a place, from biomarkers to functional metrics to subjective, assessments of how you're feeling, your sense of community, all those things, all those are important. But as more and more data expands, I think people are going to honestly be even more confused because now there's more things to be like lost in.
But continuing on that conversation, what Rudy's talking about, I was at a Clearly presentation a while back, Rudy, and this is one of our partners, and probably speak upon this a little bit more in our clinical setting. One of the things that they did mention was, hey, we're taking these tests. Are these tests adding in more, test anxiety, or are we just testing for testing's sake? Like, what are we doing with that data? I think that brings up a good point where when people start taking tests, the consumers start taking these tests, and it's like, what does this all mean? How can they sift through all that and navigate through all that, especially here at Cenegenics, because there are going to be a lot more tests. The technology is getting better. But again, I don't want the person that I'm dealing with across the table to have anxiety or just taking tests for test's sake.
Yeah. I think the thing to look at it as the way to look at it is to almost look at like the various tests and data collection in a progressive way, almost as if it's like course curriculum. So when you first start out in trying to identify elements of your health, I believe that like comprehensive, blood-based, lab work is probably the first direction you want to go, possibly with some inclusion of genomics that are going to be actionable, things that you can actually take the data from and do something with. Now, from there, when you identify like your red flags or things that you believe you could be better, or things that tie into some of your family history that you possess certain risk factors for, that's when you can determine like, all right, let me peel back to that next layer and see what I can do from there. So for example, with Clearly is fantastic. Clearly is such a unbelievable way, an accurate way to identify risk of cardiovascular event within the next 5 to 10 years through their AI analysis of a CCTA screening. So it's exceptional for what it can do. Now, does it mean that everyone should go run out and, do it right off the bat without understanding their labs, without understanding their health history, even if they're, like 30 years old? And my answer to that is like, if you have the money and you want to do it, sure. But what I would suggest doing first is looking at your sets of comprehensive labs, identifying things like your lipid panel and your lipid profile, going beyond just your LDL, your non-HDL cholesterol, your triglycerides, and seeing what your lipoprotein A and your apolipoprotein B look like, and then also seeing some of your inflammatory markers. You can also look at yourself and see if you have any physical metrics, like if you have a high amount of visceral fat or high total body fat, if your VO2 max is poor, maybe your fitness, you don't really train very well or you don't train very often. Maybe your father or mother had, heart disease. Maybe your blood pressure is running a little bit high. If all of these kind of like little elevations across the board in the essentially the sector of cardiovascular health are elevated, that should stimulate your attention to be like, okay, what in this framing should I look into a little bit more? And that's where I think clearly can be really beneficial, because if you do have high blood pressure, if you have a high resting heart rate, if your VO2 is poor, you have a family history of heart disease, your ApoB is high, your LP(a) is also a bit high. All these risk factors, you may not have a heart attack in 5 years, but your environment, your vascular system is certainly underperforming and is not ideal. So when you look at that data, then you can take the information and understand how aggressive you need to be in your application to start to turn these things around. You can do, obviously, starting to exercise. If you smoke, you definitely want to stop that. Managing your alcohol intake, managing your stress, getting your body fat down, but also different nutraceuticals, whether it be like citrus bergamot or berberine to get your cholesterol profile down. That could be helpful. But for some people who maybe have really high levels, that could be the last piece of data through Clearly that would determine like, all right, maybe I do need like a low dose statin. We don't like to give out statin like candy, but in the element for managing cardiovascular disease risk, if we do have people that come back with a really poor CCTA evaluation and they have all these other inflammatory risk factors there, and their goal is to mitigate as much possible risk that they can manage, then there could be some application there. So I guess my word of advice is that think of it progressively and identify where you have some like misses or some opportunities to maybe learn more because some values aren't that great. Go in those directions, but really only go in those directions if you're prepared to incorporate action around what you may find.
Yeah, marker's only as good as the action it creates, in my
Mm-hmm.
eyes sometimes, because I feel like otherwise you're just chasing, I don't know, you're just going down the rabbit hole. You're just
Yeah.
chasing something down that rabbit hole, and it's not going to lead to desired outcomes for anybody. And since we're on the topic of biomarkers, I found this good question. I thought it was interesting. Where did it go? Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Oh, goodness. What happened to it? No. Okay, there we go. If you could predict your future health with a simple blood test, what are the like game-changing biomarkers that everybody needs to know about?
I honestly, I'm going to cop out of the blood test answer first and say
Ooh.
VO2,
Okay.
because with like your VO2 can be looked at as like it basically, people don't have a good VO2 by accident, right?
Hmm.
Everything you need to do to have a good VO2 is going to positively influence all these other longevity based biomarkers. Like if I'm running a run with a VO2 of like a 50, right? And I'm going to try to sustain that decade over decade. I mean, I may have some, reductions, and it's just going to happen. But to recover from that type of training that it's going to require, I'm likely going to be getting enough sleep. I'm likely going to be fueling myself appropriately. I'm likely managing my body composition so my weight's not going up, because then that would drive down my VO2. Because I'm exercising that aggressively to have a good VO2, my fasting glucose and my insulin sensitivity is going to be great. I'll probably have a really strong HDL. I'll be managing my ApoB as best as I can. I likely won't have a high CRP. So by focusing in on improving a fitness level from a
Hmm.
cardiovascular and strength perspective, how your muscles and lungs work together during peak levels of exercise, you don't have to think about all that other stuff, because if all those fitness levels are improving, you will very likely be seeing improvements in those other factors.
Okay, so this leads to the follow-up question here, and this is a little bit more like hypothetical. But what would you say that like what if everything we knew about exercise was wrong? Like what? And I think to some degree, it kind of has fallen flat on its face over the last couple decades, because it used to just be go do quote cardio for your longevity, right? Because that was like the prescription, right? Oh, you need to be like, I feel like my grandpa who was in his 80s was always like, yeah, I'm gonna go do my steady state stuff, right? But how will we use exercise knowing that we think that that might be quote wrong to some degree, quote wrong? What would it look like for people? What are they
Let
doing
me,
to increase their VO2 slash
yeah,
live that like longevity?
let me add to that too, Rudy, just because this is something that Marcos and I are seeing in the board exam. And this stuff to this date, even though it's updated for 2024, I go, this is not good information. You could hear the recordings of me in like my class going like, this stuff sucks. And how they say so is like, oh, activity 150 minutes per week, right?
Oh
Just
yeah.
general thing.
Yeah.
Resistance training 2 times per week. Or even finding, you mentioned visceral fat. Visceral fat, the best way to get it is just the BMI and the skin calipers. I'm like, there is no way that this is still the concepts that we are still using across the board. So yeah, to kind of tee up that same question, just adding that little tidbit there for you, Rudy.
Yeah, and I think honestly that's where, I mean, I'm not answering the question yet, but like that's where a lot of people are underserved in how they can take common information that are like blanket statement pieces of information and try to apply that to really improve their health. And that's where, again, like just to plug for Cenegenics real quick, because I mean, that's what's different with us is because everything we do is individualized. So for a person who comes in with a VO2 max of an 18, right, who is probably maybe 33% body fat and unfit, 150 minutes of walking per week is going to yield positive improvements in their VO2 because they are heavy, they are unfit, and that is enough of a stimulus to drive an adaptation. If I have Marcos just walk for 150 minutes a week and say, that's all you need to do for cardio, he's not stimulating his metabolic, system and his physiology to then overcome that adaptation and then create a new environment. So for him, that doesn't work. So if we look at exercise and how we make recommendations, rather than making blanket statements around certain types of cardio, like aerobic or high intensity interval training, or how many minutes we need to do per week, or how many grams of protein we should eat, like any of those, like kind of like very common, just blanket statements. From an exercise perspective, I feel like people should be taught to really understand perceived exertion in a ranking scale and then have the designation of time and volume based on those levels of exertion. For example, like if someone's doing very high intensity work for repeated volumes within a given session, that frequency doesn't need to be 150 minutes per week. But if someone is barely even scratching the surface of getting into a exercise aerobic metabolism, they need to do a lot more volume. So it's this inverse relationship that people need to be aware of intensity and duration. But also for fit people, you like intensity needs to be a part of that. Almost like it's really a hybrid of that. Like we see improvements in little bits above like zone two. It doesn't need to be like zone two only, but if you go just a little bit above zone two and you try to extend out that distance, that's going to improve VO2. Zone two by itself will improve VO2. But for someone who, is trying to just kind of absorb and learn from all this information, like I would typically recommend understanding the perceived exertion scale and attributing like what's an appropriate, like maybe weekly volume for each type of zone so that people have a little bit more of a more concrete target that they can try to achieve.
I like that. I like the weekly approach. I feel like is where everybody in that's like worth a damn is really at these days because it gives you probably just enough time to like sit there and analyze and kind of grasp like the fact that every day could be a little bit different, whether it's the weekday and weekend, right? Because that's how society is. But at the same time, to kind of pick and choose the battle of the different days, and then like you said, the frequency of exertion, and then kind of figure out like, how many days are at 1 or 2, how many days might be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Like whatever those varying levels need to be. And like you just said, that starting point and starting block for so many people is different. Like you just said, If I see someone with an 18 though, Rudy, they're probably closer to 40% body fat. Just saying, you know.
Probably.
Um,
Well, unless they're really heavy and they have like a lot of lower body mass.
And if they're 18, just getting up a flight of stairs must be like the most strenuous thing in their day.
Yeah.
Like
Well, and
insane.
that's why, I mean, that's why you go to rural areas, and that's not to call out rural areas, but that's like where I went to undergrad. You hear people, yeah, I dropped 20 pounds and I park in the farthest parking spot away. And when I go to run errands and I lost 20 pounds just doing that. Well, because that moves the needle enough. That's a stimulus enough for someone who's super unfit. And that's fantastic. That's like low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
But that strategy is, not going to work for the three of us. It may
Yeah.
not work for people, listening. So it needs to be like appropriately, it needs to be relative to the individual.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That comprehensive analysis and individualizing it, and as the fitter that you get, that's your inevitable doom. You keep getting fitter, so you have to do more,
And same thing goes with like pull-ups, right? Like pull-ups are a great marker for like strength to weight ratio. But at the same time, like if you're like 230 and you can crank out 10 pull-ups, and then you start like cutting down, you maybe get down to say like 190, and now you can do more pull-ups. Like that's great from your ratio, but like truth of the matter is you got weaker. Like so like it's no longer like you're not going to grow your lats now that you're 30 pounds lighter doing pull-ups.
Yeah.
So like there again, it's relative as far as the stimulus and the exertion.
I got that. That makes sense.
wait a minute. You mean the fact that I could do 70 pounds with my pull-up sets versus 45 because I dropped 40 pounds is not impressive?
Yeah, the number on the weight got bigger on the chain,
But I wasn't actually getting weaker. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
That's
that
the
is
funny thing.
That's a good one.
That's the
Rudy,
funny thing
I
about
kinda-
rucking too. Like when I ruck
Yeah.
like with the 60 pounds, and I put because I'm like 210, so I was my highest weight was like 265. But like when I put on like the 60 pounds, I'm like, man, I was like, that's why I had bigger calves because this sucks. Like, I was walking around every day like this.
No, I love that. Yeah.
it's always such a humbling experience when you finally put weight back on your body and you're like, this was me existing, quote, last quarter. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, or this is what it would feel like to be a little bit bigger. It's like, I don't even know, like how your body versus that and does it. And yeah, James, I'll let you go. And then
I had a question, Rudy. I've always actually wondered this because under your tutelage, almost 3 years now. I know Marco's unit been longer, but like the amount of information, Rudy, especially around nutraceuticals. First off, where did that come from? Like, where did that general curiosity come from? Of like every time we go over labs together, every time we go over supplements together, it's either you already know it, you're ahead of it, you already have an opinion about it, whether you're like, that thing's crap, or actually that's good, or we have that in our formulary. Talk to me next time. Where did that come from?
That came from really a genuine interest when I was I probably started taking supplements when I was like in my weight loss as like a high school kid, like, started taking creatine. Like that's when Cell Tech from Muscle Tech was huge. And like everyone was buying these tubs of like creatine monohydrate with just like dextrose. And we were spending like $70 for like, 30 servings of it. It was stupid. But my version of it was like, I get like Welch's grape juice and like creatine monohydrate and do it on the cheap. But so I started taking supplements at a young age for like, improving body composition, athletic performance. But then again, going back to like, my friend who was a bodybuilder being sponsored by, a supplement company, like he would get a bunch of stuff and, we try it and use it. And that's when I wouldn't say it was like the Wild West with nutraceuticals, but there were way more things that were not banned by, different supplement bills at the time. So like they worked pretty well. I mean, they probably, shut down some of my like natural testosterone production a little bit at the time, but they were pretty interesting. But then getting into undergrad and grad school and really diving into like sport nutrition and optimizing various components of our physiology and our metabolic health, that's where it really took off. And from the Cenegenics side, I mean, it's like I'm not like naturally gifted really in anything. Like it's just through experience and through my own passion and my interest and time spent studying that's why I'm so familiar with the formulary. I mean, ultimately, pretty much anything that, you guys see in the formulary that Cenegenics has to offer, I probably had a hand on and, learn that from our different providers for when we wanted to roll that in, what the application is, what the efficacious dosing is, maybe what lower dosing may be available when it's paired with other synergistic materials.
Yeah.
But then also, like, I'm just have a natural curiosity around some of the products. So identifying, like going through PubMed or Google Scholar around, what kind of articles are accessible around how we can improve certain things. Like for our natural testosterone formula that we created, maybe 10 years ago now, we had a really cool product that we first piloted. It was a proprietary blend. And then it had all of the like studies that were used to formulate that proprietary blend. So my colleague and I, at the time, we just dove into all that research and read literally every single one to see, all right, they were using this much, ashwagandha, or they were using this much long jackroot. And then we determined that we had a good shot at creating our own custom formula and moving away from that other product that was proprietary blend. So we created it, and it's been fantastic. I mean, for example, like long jackroot, that's a natural adaptogenic herb that can be utilized to improve, total and free testosterone. A lot of some of the studies that were used, I don't want to say a lot because not all of these things have like extensive research, but it's enough to have some curiosity and some support. But the utilization of like 350 milligrams of long jackroot daily I think it was, I forget what the percentage of actives it was able to significantly improve testosterone levels in users. So when we were creating the formula, we wanted to make sure full dose we hit 350 or above. So we do 375. And there were other products that were like that. So when we create these products, it's what is efficacious as a standalone. But if it's not efficacious as a standalone, what is the reason behind that? Is it that there are other supporting nutraceuticals that can also provide similar support, that they're also, lifting and moving down levers that are also beneficial? For example, like the pre-workout, power pre-workout, that's driven primarily, in my opinion, by peak ATP, which is a patented material that's at the patented dose that it's studied at to improve sustained power output, reducing fatigue perception. But it also has cordyceps sinensis in it at a studied dose of a full 1,000 milligrams, where we could increase oxygen utilization. And then we have beta alanine. Beta alanine is at a studied dose on the lower range of like 1.6.
Yeah.
So someone could call that out, be like, beta alanine at 1.6 doesn't do anything. Well, it does, especially in collaboration with these other nutraceuticals. It creates a more robust product. So I wouldn't recommend taking 1.6 beta alanine by itself in perpetuity and thinking you're going to get the same benefits. But that's where so all that work, I mean, that's a lot of work, right? Creating these multi-ingredient products. So I just have a lot of time in the trenches, understanding that data, seeing what's, what is certainly tried and true and has significant volumes of data behind it, and other ones that maybe only have a couple different, published pieces of research, but the demographic it's studied in fits our model and it fits who our primary consumer is. And it's, it has an NDI number and it's recognized as safe. Like for those opportunities, they're certainly worth testing.
Yeah. That's where I see a differentiating with the supplements for sure, just because I've had my hand in, big sales with Prestige Labs, Ed Turney, those guys, when I was running gyms, and they were a proprietary blend. But when you look at them, they're CGMP certified, but I didn't understand the efficacious dosing until you kind of came along and you're talking about clinical dosing, the studies backing it up, and making sure that, hey, we have physicians signing off on this stuff and people's licenses are on the line. So that's how much of a quality tier that these products are as compared to, just anything that you can get off of Amazon or something like that.
That's a big thing that should be recognized too. So our utility of nutraceuticals as strategies to improve like health outcomes is significant because we are delivering these nutraceuticals through clinical practice. So when people look at supplements and they purchase supplements, there's multiple like channels of distribution. You have your clinical channel, which is what we are. You have your retail channel, which is like your brick and mortar stores that people go to and buy products off of. And there's also like your mass retail, like your Sam's Club, Costco kind of places. And each of those essentially understand that they have a different consumer, and they're all still on the same hook for things. Like they're all regulated by the FDA. I think one thing that drives me a little nuts is that people are like, supplement industry is not regulated at all, blah, blah, blah. Well, it is regulated. It's regulated very tightly. The challenge and like the caveat to that is that it's regulated post-market. So drugs are regulated prior to them coming into the marketplace. Supplements are regulated afterwards. So the
Uh,
three of us can get some raw material on Amazon, create a product, get the C of A's. If we get it made in a good facility that's CGMP compliant, FDA registered, whatever, we can get it all to market. We can do it the right way. But then if something happens, like if Seamus, if one of your buddies buys it and he gets like diarrhea from it and he
yeah.
submits a claim, then the FDA is going to crack down on us. They're going to investigate us and they're probably going to bury us. So there's still regulation, but it comes at a different point in the marketplace. So that's why it's important, like for us as clinicians, we need to work with manufacturers of nutraceuticals that manufacture products primarily for clinicians, because we have so much more to lose. If we give our patients products that don't meet label claims, or that are, they weren't quarantined accurately, they weren't tested, and now the material is no longer good, or it's impure, whatever it may be, and it drives a negative outcome, we would like feel the wrath of the FDA from that regulatory process. So when we manufacture products, we work with our partners who that's their bread and butter. Their main distribution is through that clinical channel, so that not only do we provide a better product, but we also go straight to the consumer versus going through like the regular distribution channel. And that's something that I think that people should also be aware of, is like when you buy a supplement at, like, this is not to knock like a GNC or a vitamin shop, it's just the nature of the beast, is that they typically purchase their inventory, right, from a mass distributor. And then that distributor is typically working with a broker from that company that's trying to sell that product to get into retail. Now, when you, and so then you have the main company that has it, who's also like, they set their retail pricing or their wholesale pricing based off the cost of goods from that, wherever they're getting it made. So when you have essentially like four people getting a piece of the profit, how marked up is that product that you're getting? So I don't take issue with our products and our price points, even though we are comparably within, maybe like a higher market range. But it's because our materials cost more to manufacture, because we are going through this better clinical channel for production, because we are using raw materials that are not only efficaciously dosed, but also ones that are going through quarantine checks compared to CFAs, label claims, micro, like USP testing for biomicroorganisms, heavy metals, all these pieces. Like, we are spending the money up front on a higher cost of goods and still coming in within market pricing range. Our products, because of that, because there's less hands in the pot essentially before it actually touches the consumer, that's why we can have the trust within our products to do what they're supposed to do when they're for ApoB, or when they're for managing glucose or insulin or bringing down CRP, or exercise performance, all of those elements.
Snippet, clippable. I mean, you kind
Flip
of
that.
seriously though. I mean, the understanding of the why, and I think people could obviously go to our Cenegenics Life, I believe.com, and get our supplements just straight to them. I think free shipping with an order over $75.
Nice plug, nice plug.
And but understanding again, like you just said, why the dosaging is at those certain things, why the price point is what it is because of the quality checks that and balances that are going on. And again, these are the exact same products that we would give people under the physician's care, which again is something that's again super important to consider, right? So you really do get what you pay for in that sense. And obviously, I know myself and Seamus, as we've coached people on the outside, price can be an issue. And I know that even us in our channels talking about like, how do we make it so that it can even be more available, but obviously that's based off of like buying and our leverage with our, suppliers and all those things, the raw material that you would then need to, order in order to create that, patented version of it, or, the formulary version of it. And then it also can help the consumer maybe be like, oh, I can actually continue to buy this because it's the $5 difference between the other one. And you also mentioned that other component about like the synergy of a few other ingredients working together. Is that why the citrulline is lower in the pre-workout? Is there even
Yeah.
citrulline in it?
So,
Because the other
so
one is,
yeah, so the citrulline is pretty low in that, because and that's another thing that's unique. So just for insider information around the power development, is that that product was formulated for primarily our customer base, like our patient base within our membership.
Yeah. So
And
usually, well, I think people should also know our average age is like 52. So a
yeah,
52-year-old would be using this, which is also why the caffeine is half of what a normal pre-work or a third of what a normal pre-workout would be, right?
yeah.
You know.
So when you look at like in a professional setting for our patient base, like whether they're training in the morning or they're typically training like in the evenings. So for those users in the evenings, we did not want to have a high stimulus, like a stimulant product. Now, one of the benefits also with the cordyceps is that it is that adaptogen. So this is theoretical. So don't like, don't come down on me on this. But with the combination of the adaptogen with the low dose caffeine, I feel like it doesn't have so strong of a stimulatory effect and from cortisol production that can also manage that a little bit more appropriately. But the piece is when you look at power, we have a like endurance perspective in it
Hmm.
essentially for like cardio. We have a vasodilation component, and then we have a like perception of fatigue kind of management. So those could be three separate products in their own right at lower price points per piece, but they're all rolled into one so that our members get the benefits of all three. So it's like a multifaceted formula. And that's where like a lot of our other like NutriPacks are, from brain enhancer to these other products where they can focus not just on attention but also cognitive like inflammation in the brain, improving neurotransmitter support, all those elements that can kind of be rolled in. Now that's not for everyone though too. If you have if you know a person who's like, I just want this type of support, then we can deliver on that. But many people, again, talking about testing fatigue, they're also in like product fatigue, and they're like, can I just get something that's going to cover my bases for the multiple like concurrent training that I'm trying to accomplish?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like me at competitions at CrossFit. I'm like, this is going to be perfect for you because I know you took some pre-workout earlier. Give people a little taste, and they're like, "Hey, Marco's, what was that pre-workout that you were using?" I was like, "Oh, okay, okay." It's like
It's
you
great
like the
for
fact that you were.
CrossFit.
Oh, it honestly,
It's
It's good.
yeah, like honestly, that and again, this is like my own little blend with it. That with some additional Reds powders,
yeah,
just kind of additional beetroot stuff, a little cranberry juice, creatine is like my morning stack, like 5 days a week. And again, it's like, well, I'm not gonna lie, I do like an extra 200 milligrams of caffeine with it too, with the
yeah,
dose. But it's like that's me. I'm also working out at 5 a.m., so that little extra caffeine throughout that morning is nice. But like again, like the lack of jitters, which I think is a big one with like pre-workout that it provides, the focus, that like extra gear, right? Like it's definitely things that I've done it with, I've done CrossFit with and without it, and now I never do it without it because I know that like just I mean maybe there's a little placebo there, maybe it is the cordyceps, I don't know, but I definitely know the PKTP definitely helps with oxygen uptake like significantly. So yeah.
yeah. And I think, yeah, I mean, I do my own little thing too. Like I'll do alpha GPC as an addition to it. I'd love to put it in the product, but alpha GPC would be expensive to add at like a volume that I would want to have it in there. So I'll just add that, to whenever I'm having that pre-workout. And for me, it's like subjectively, like when I like I don't like meditate. Like I recommend people like take time for themselves to de-stress, whatever. I don't actually practice meditation,
Hmm.
but I like have the cop out where it's like when I train, I can honestly say that I don't think about anything else other than the set that I just completed, or I'm watching the clock until my next set and I'm trying to recover until that happens. So it's like I'm kind of like I'm like in the void essentially, like that. I don't really think about anything else. Like I'll play music, but I don't really. You could ask me what song just played, and I don't know. And I don't know if that attributes to me just really having a love for training, or if that's part of the support that I have from those nutraceuticals pre-workout.
How
Probably a
much
combination of both.
Yeah,
how
Combination of
much
both, yeah.
yeah.
but how much alpha GPC? A gram, two,
Oh.
three?
No, not a. Yeah, maybe a gram. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm gonna have to start putting that in my stack then.
It's in Ghost, dude. I'm telling you, it's
It
already in
is.
there.
That's what I went when I got a ghost. So my favorite right now is I do a little bit of a blend too, but sometimes if I'm just not feeling a workout, I'll do Gorilla Mind because they finally got in my gym.
nice.
That's legit. Ghost is good. But it definitely, for me, I'm not necessarily taking that much caffeine all the time. I kind of wait until I've warmed up. So I do like the power after the fact. So it's
Yeah,
good.
Mr.
and
Um,
Hey,
and, and,
Mr.
and, that, and
Bender.
that- and that's where the genomics are interesting too, because one of the
Mm.
values that we're looking at is if you are a hyper responder to caffeine or if you're like a fast metabolizer of it. So like I have a colleague, who's a very strong response to caffeine, where he can't do 100 milligrams of caffeine like after like 9 o'clock in the morning, or he won't be able to
Hmm.
sleep. Whereas me, I work out late typically, and I do caffeine, and it doesn't disrupt my sleep. When I got my genomics back, it said that I was a hyper metabolizer, a fast
Yeah.
metabolizer of caffeine. So I process it pretty quickly. And fortunately, it's not sustained release caffeine that's in that pre workout.
Yeah.
We put a little bit of sustained release caffeine in the Incinerate fat burner, but I don't take that. So like that doesn't impact me.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're back. The final countdown. It's like, we've had to break this episode into a few parts. We had
I
technical
love it.
issues and a piss break. So let's go.
No, Rudy, thanks so much for those insights. I think those are freaking phenomenal. I think this is kind of like the deep end of that, you know, part of this Cenegenics guest series is also like longevity, right? Where do you see the next 5 to 10 years in this field? What excites you about it? And how do you see Cenegenics being preemptive to be on top of all of it?
So I think, anytime, think about when you're public speaking, right? If you go and do a presentation at a conference, or you're teaching at a class, and if you're teaching and you're speaking to someone who is like really engaged with you, like they're looking at you and they're nodding, they're listening, they understand what you're saying, and you have the excitement and the support that you can go even more, right? You can dive deeper because you know that they understand, and you know they have a base covered as far as like what they've learned already. And that's what I'm really excited for Cenegenics, and really any of the consumers or people that are interested in health span and maximizing longevity, is because people have such a better knowledge of different strategies and different elements to be aware of than they've had really ever. It's especially since I've been around. Now, with that will certainly come some of its challenges around people that maybe went down a rabbit hole that's not necessarily as fruitful for them as some other rabbit holes could be. But regardless, they're still really engaged. And that's where I think people are going to have the most success, is that when you have a really engaged and dynamic relationship with a physician, our performance health team and our clinicians there, and also a member or a patient, when people are communicating and acting and asking meaningful questions, taking those insights and applying to them to their day to day, and doing those things consistently. And then all the meantime, like getting the biofeedback from the ongoing labs, the repeat DEXAs, repeat VO2s, that those accountability phases, people are going to have results, in my opinion, that they've never experienced before. Not just for themselves, but in comparison to cohorts from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and so on. Because now you're able to progress in this like educational process, essentially, or this like progression. What maybe have took like someone 10 years to go from point A to point B on, as far as like understanding and learning and awareness, they're now coming in with like, a 300 level understanding. So to get to that, end goal, they're going to be able to achieve that much faster, because they are truly and wholeheartedly bought into these concepts. And that's where I think that, since we're moving at that type of speed, things like genomics that, again, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, were a really tough thing to understand for a lot of people, are now going to be able to be understood really well. And not just understood, but also be able to be applied to their day-to-day successfully, to really mitigate risks that may really support their longevity and health span goals. So that's where I'm really excited, is that when you have like, if there's another person on the other end of the line who's committed and understanding and is speaking the same language, that communication goes way beyond what it would be if you're trying to communicate with someone that doesn't really understand, right? Now, there's a place for those people too. We manage both people, but we manage everyone from this side of the field and this side of the field. And that's the nice thing, going back to like what I preached earlier, is the individual needs analysis. It doesn't just mean biomarkers and functional metrics, but it's also the subjective and the awareness of that person. Like, if someone is not like ready, willing, and able to be able to do like challenging things right now, like quote unquote challenging things, like maybe relative to me, well, then let's see what they are ready and willing and able to do that's, challenging for them, or what like relative level of challenges are they able to adopt. So, so while we are still for everyone, I think what I'm really excited by are the ones that have a ton of interest, to maybe pursue beyond, like clinical goals that we've seen, and really, we're seeing more single digit body fats with some people coming in. We're seeing higher VO2s. I mean, Marcos and I were in Miami for an event. Now, granted, everyone was younger, but like we saw like 6 VO2s above a 50, which was like crazy. And it's awesome. It's exciting to see. And I think we're going to see more of that. And then I'm excited to see these people get older too, and how they can sustain, these health benefits. Yeah. And then also when they do have conversations, like talking about the rabbit holes that were maybe the ones that weren't wrong, but maybe misguided for the time, those are really helpful conversations. Like, I saw an ad on social media, like as we all do, that's like very like, like this much information, and it's going down like this little circle of piece around genetic mutations around your like methylation cycle. Like, and if like if you're taking the wrong kind of folate, and if you're taking the wrong kind of folate, you're going to have a heart attack, and heart attacks kill this many people per year. And you need to take this patented folate that's for people with, that have this genetic mutation. Well, it's like, yes, I mean, that's not wrong information. It does create like a scare tactic where like, oh, like shit, like I need to use this version or else I'm probably gonna have a heart attack. The flip side of that coin is like, you may also not have that genetic mutation. So like number one, like get some, like identify it, like find out if you actually like have this genetic mutation. And if you don't do your genomics to find out, you could also look a little bit downstream. It's not direct, but you could look indirectly at your homocysteine levels. Yeah. Like if your methylation, pathway is optimal, you would typically have a normal or like well-managed homocysteine value based on your B vitamin consumption, your folate utility, all those pieces. So it's like if someone has a really healthy homocysteine and they're, eating a lot of leafy greens and they're having, whole eggs and they're taking like, a methylation supplement and their homocysteine is managed, they shouldn't be like trying to go down the rabbit hole and pulling research papers like, do I have this, 5-MTHF genetic mutation? Because they probably don't. So it's like, I think, again, it's a good thing that people are this knowledgeable, but it's also, being receptive to the data around like, being receptive to conversations, like being able to have these things. Because people sometimes will find a hill that they want to die on. And that's a challenge to coach around, because you need to know then when to like push and pull and like, let people have a certain win, or to like, if it's harmful, like to really like kind of be firm and try to make those adjustments from there.
Yeah. I think like you just said, the indirect way of potentially looking at those things is, again, like you just said, I think you could also use the argument that like, hey, because I don't know, I'm going to pick the methylated form, right? Like as like by proxy as well, right? Like let me just shore it up. Like I don't need to spend however much with the genomics test would be. I don't even need to do, a lower ticket one with regards to just like inflammatory markers in a blood draw. Like you could just shore it up and be like, hey, like I'm covering my basis because of the information and how people like us are trying to distill it down, right? That's like with people that I work with that are outside of Cenegenics. I'm like, hey, here's some recommendations, and we're going to pick this because we don't know, and I don't expect you to be paying for something in the near future based on your age to take a look at that right now.
Yeah.
But like you just said, like we've talked about in this episode, like the cost to a consumer to look at particular things that can help elevate you a little bit quicker, which might be the difference in the secret to living, to quote, being a centenarian, potentially, at least, I don't know, maybe, right? And I think that's, again, part of what we're here to do. Well, one, on the podcast, but two, like as an organization as a whole, is to provide information and let people know, like, we're not gatekeeping anything.
No.
The more you know, the better. And if you want people to help comb through that, even better. We have over 40 of the finest physicians. I had to look that up recently. I was like, how many physicians do we actually have on our staff? Because I know we have like 25 centers and everything. But how many doctors is it actually? And I was like, 41, I think is what I counted. I think it might actually be
and we've actually trained over 1,000 in age management medicine through our nonprofit arm. So
Oh, there we go. Okay, so we've
yeah,
touched that, and I know that we continue to go back into events like a or AMMG or AAMG to be able to continue to provide and talk, about like what it is we've been doing, how we continue to do it, and what we're excited about in the future. So I
Yeah.
think all these things are fantastic, talking points, and why we wanted to bring this series to people's attention. And I know that for like us with you, we definitely have a few different episodes in mind, whereas this one's kind of like the base
yeah,
episode of like what it is that like again like why we're always excited to not go to work quote not go to work every day like you said at the beginning of
Yeah,
this like
we got things that we like, but no, it's really good. And Rudy, again, we want to thank you for the time. And this Cenegenics guest series, really, the point of this is to showcase guys like, for those that are listening, share this to someone, share this to someone that is kind of going into that space where they need to figure out a few things for themselves, and they're trying to work on that health span, not just their lifespan, but their health span, and really understand and analysis, have an analysis, but have a performance health team behind you. It's what we do every day. We love it. And it's also at the same time, not going down rabbit holes like Rudy said, but being able to go down the right path, guided, having a team behind you and making those things happen. Because we live in a day and age today, social media, with the fear mongering, certain brands, whatever it is,
yeah
Cenegenics, sits at the top of having almost 30 years, amazing physicians, amazing performance health coaches, and folks that are going to be locked in to help you out. Rudy, not to, I just noticed, I think we're coming up on an hour, so I want to be just respectful of your time here. Any closing words? What can people do to come see us, check us out? Anything exciting that you hit, and we'll close it there.
yeah. So I think one of the things that I like to share, and I had a fantastic call with one of our patients in a center 2 days ago. We went over her labs and micronutrients and did all these things. And there are markers that need improvement and things that were a little bit red flag, maybe ones that are like yellow, like cautionary areas. But she was, I think one of the things she was surprised by was that I didn't take those opportunities to try to upsell like everything. Like, oh, let's do this additional test, or like, oh, let's get on these supplements, or oh, let's talk to your doctor about this medication, because everyone's path is different. Like I said, everyone's like reception to the information they're taking in is going to be different, and their sense of urgency is going to be different. And the thing I like to implore to people is that so much of what you can manage with your health when it comes to a health span and longevity can be achieved through consistent behaviors in your lifestyle. And it's like, obviously that's a lot, right? There's a lot of many things, from sleep, stress, exercise, nutrition, whatever. But then not being true to yourself, but being real with yourself, that if there are gaps that you have in that you are continuing to be less than optimal with, that's when you can consider rolling in certain nutraceuticals that maybe help assist with those gaps. Maybe you're not eating enough, leafy greens and, red meats, and you don't eat eggs because you're allergic. So having a good like B complex supplementation would be good for you, because you're missing out on that one. And then the same thing with lipids. Like if your exercise is in place, your body fat's managed, but your ApoB is elevated, then, get a clearly scan to identify your real risk factors coming up in 5 to 10 years, and then have that conversation with your doctor about if, some type of lipid lowering medication is right for you to mitigate your risk. So do everything that you can with lifestyle and behaviors consistently before you start to lean into a sense of, never really have a sense of dependency, but before you start to lean into a potential sense of dependency around nutraceuticals and pharmaceutical items. I'm part of the organization where like I help, drive revenue and manage revenue. So it sounds like it's counterproductive for me to say that. But like, aside from revenue production, like we are about patient outcomes and doing that in the most high integrity way possible that is valuable to our patients and our non-patients, just our listeners alike. So that's what I really implore everyone, that, many of these things are within your control, but when things get a little bit hairy and they get out of control, we very much likely have the services and opportunities available to help fill those gaps.
oh yeah I think it's a great way of putting it. And like you just said, it's really about that value exchange. As we're humans. Human to human value exchange is like the most important thing in principles. It's why we still have to have people come back in once a year to repeat everything. And we want to have that friendly and fostering environment. And like you just said, like filling in the gaps where you might not be able to, doesn't mean it won't be it won't necessarily be for forever, but that like given the current situation, this current, quarter or half a year, these are just your insurance policies, and like, let's make sure to shore it up. We can bring it in and we can take it out just as easily. And I think I had a call with somebody here today actually, where it was the same kind of thing. It was like, I really want to make my own egg bites. I want to like quote save the money on it, but I just don't have the time. I was like, well, maybe you should just buy the egg bites for the time
Yeah.
being. Like, you know what I mean? Something so simple. Like you're gonna get more protein at breakfast, and that's like a thing that you're trying to improve upon, but you're not doing it because you're lacking time. And then it was like, man, I really love our calls because you'll just call me out on the things that I know I need to be doing, and you're just solidifying that like I was on the right thought process, but now I need to go create action with it. And that's the value that hopefully Seamus and I can bring to the table with all of our outside clients and all of our patients
Yeah.
at Cenegenics alike. Like, we're really in this idea of health coaching now. Hell, me and Seamus have been spending the last year and a half focusing on trying to become certified health coaches because
Which is
we
incredible, by
want.
the way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And because we're like, man, like, and again, not that we are going to agree with everything that's in the certification, but how it hopefully opens up opportunities to expand and talk about health and in different areas. And I think it's not a one size fits all approach. But I
Yeah.
do have one last question, and
Yeah.
I know because I've been thinking about this here recently. If we were to create an avatar of someone that's going to have a really high quality of life, what are the habits that they're doing? Are there like a big five or a big three in your eyes? Because I think I can contribute one or two. Maybe Shavish, you have one or two, and then Rudy, two for you as well. Um,
Can
so
we skinny it down? Like how old is this person? What's the body comp? What's the lean
no,
mass?
this is the perfect human. What does the perfect human look like in
Okay.
terms of their habits? And are we all kind of in a alignment with that? Because I think it's like an interesting avatar build because it might have a couple different little pieces that, again, you might find incredible value with from a nutraceutical side of things, right? Whereas I might bring in something else that's, again, a little bit left field, right? So I'm just kind of curious if we can create one as three health coaches,
Yeah,
would.
I'll say one is like adaptability as a habit across the board because it's just like
Mm,
more meta, meaning like things will happen in life. There's different seasons in life that we talk about, right, Marcos? Every 90 days. It's just having the adaptability to adapt and overcome, whether that's in the day to day, the week to week, or a season. And knowing that if someone has a goal, are they able to adapt? Because sometimes I've been that person that just goes, no, has to be the way. And I've just been so rigid on my plan that the whole thing kind of flops. But being able to be flexible enough to make it happen. So adaptability, I think, is like a meta kind of habit.
okay. For me, because you asked that question about like movement, and I think that the avatar of a person that's living a really high quality of life for long term has actually 120 minutes of activity in their daily life, not like weekly. It is a daily kind of requirement. And when people actually get to that threshold and feel that, they then know what it feels like to be downregulated below that. Like they feel off because they basically create this this level of well-being and understanding of all these other little micro habits that go in with the movement, that they're actually fostering more learning, they're fostering more things for their health, and they're starting to create new challenges for themselves, like we talked about with rucking, for example. We're now creating another stimulus on top of this other habit. And I've found that like if I can get people to that at some point, at least to experience it for a while, not saying it needs to be 120 minutes for everybody, but like you'll find that right number. But I stand strongly behind 2 hours a day, so that's my part of it, of this avatar.
Seamus got me on like the whole meta perspective now, so I apologize if this isn't the direct answer. I can do another one after, but I
Yeah.
think one of the things to really could be beneficial for many people is to think more pragmatically and being more stoic in how we observe like why we should be doing these things, because when you take the emotion kind of out of why, like, like with exercise and eating healthy and taking care of yourself and sleeping, it drives back to like, all right, I want to see myself as a 80-year-old person, 90-year-old person that is functional, capable, well loved. I have my family, all these pieces, and it's like, what is it going to take for me to achieve that? And the answers are simple. I mean, you ask anyone, even that doesn't really have a strong knowledge base around, nutrition, exercise. Like, what are ways to stay healthy long term? Like, people say eat vegetables, eat protein, exercise, don't get fat, like be fit, all those pieces. So just knowing those answers, like, all right, well, how do I achieve that? And it's, you put in the work and you create those habits. So if you like, not like, oh damn, like I love pizza, I can't believe I could give a pizza, or like, oh damn, I want this Rice Krispie treat. Like, I couldn't imagine not having that. Like, taking the like emotion out and that behavior, like that, just that response out, it's tough. Like, that's why this is the perfect human, because this is the person that can do it. But like, the more you can be like that and be stoic in how you analyze challenges related to nutrition, exercise, I mean, really all elements of life, I believe the more health, the higher health span you'll have, the larger health span you'll have, and the better longevity you'll have.
I love that. It's a good
Both you
answer.
guys with these very
Meta.
so
Meta.
adaptability, stoicism in a sense, which
Neutrality, a little bit of neutrality.
yeah, but also that's those kind of I feel like those are habits that would go together in a sense, because you have to become adaptable
Yeah,
to understand
you have no
this
choice.
neutrality. You have no
Yeah.
choice to. But I think it's a coming of age tale in both scenarios here for your guys' kind of meta view, and people will have to experience something N of one in order to then create the adaptability and also that other mindset.
Stoic, yep.
Right, like, because I know that for me, like, you're going to go through athletic endeavors, and I think that people need to pursue that as well. So I feel like if I'm going to go meta, like, pursue things that make you uncomfortable in an athletic endeavor realm, because through the failures of those things, you're going to learn so much about, like, wow, I was capable to do up to this point and I couldn't do it anymore. But at the same time, like, I don't know if I would want to repeat that thing. It's like, maybe everybody should sign up for that 5K, that 10K, that half marathon, that High Rocks challenge, that different thing, so that you get to that pinnacle, that moment. And either you felt like you're woefully unprepared, you're over prepared, maybe you're prepared in some of the right things, but not everything. And again, then it goes back to both of your guys, like adaptability, and then being neutral about, like, oh, this actually benefited me. But I think that is part of the perfect human, is like being able to have it's like, you guys, it's growth mindset, right? And there's certain things that go into that. And I love that.
No,
I
that's
love
a great
that
point.
like that you guys are thinking about it from that perspective, where to me, I'm like, this is my logical brain just always on. It's like, hey,
Always,
like,
no, it's just a different, I mean,
Seamus threw me off, so I don't think
Marcos threw me off with like some deeper philosophical stuff, so I have to do it once in a while on him. But anyways, Rudy, I'm gonna just conclude it here, just to make sure we're all respectful of each other's times and just locking it in. Rudy, thank you so much. Obviously, you guys can find us at Cenegenics. As you can see with the guest series, we're going to have a load of performance health coaches, some of our executive team, and obviously these physicians talking about longevity, health span, and all the things that are on top of the heap in this kind of field. So keep it up. Just comment below if you guys have any questions, comments, and you can find Rudy online as well. So we'll see you guys on the next episode.